Well, certainly we are moving towards what we might call a bot-centric future. In other words, it is something set to make all of us, smartphone users in particular, use the internet in a chit-chat fashion with a virtual assistant. But assistant like Alexa, Siri's, will soon be considered too impersonal. In other words, we want to move across the line from the impersonal robots to entities that know our habits, our routines, our hobbies, our interests, just as well as, or even better, than our closest friends and relatives. And what is more is that they are always with us. They are always with us and there for us, available at the touch of a button. And for companies, this is a winning formula. The smartphone users have proved that they are quite willing to download and spend time with a limited number of apps. So businesses might be better off trying to connect with consumers in the apps where they are already spending plenty of time. And the bot can potentially provide greater convenience than apps and web searches because it can understand natural speech patterns and provide the personal touch that otherwise it is quite impersonal. So this process has very deep psychological ramifications because when we interact with chatbots, our brain is led to believe that we are chatting with another human being. And this happens as the bots create a false mental perception of the interaction that is taking place. And so it encourages us to ascribe to the bot other human-like features that they do not possess, of course. Now, this attribution of human characteristics is not uncommon. We have entire religions based on attributing human characteristics to animals. So attributing human characteristics to events, to objects, to animals is a natural tendency for us. It even has a name, anthropomorphism. So in a sense, computers have always been great candidates for anthropomorphic attribution. Since their advent, they have been perceived, well, initially just as purely machines, or maybe an interaction between the hardware and the software. But they also can contract viruses. They can act autonomously in recent years. The personal characteristics element in currently has been increasingly strengthened in an effort to make them look warm and humanoid. And so in that respect, that's why we are so vulnerable to bots, because the increased humanization of the chat bots can indeed trigger quite a crucial crossing or a shift in human forms of interaction. This, of course, comes with risks, as you pointed out, that we may be interacting with a chatbot that is not really interested in our well-being, financially or otherwise, and can have quite a bit of negative influence on the way that we interact with others. That is absolutely true. And it is only going to grow, particularly with the 5G technology coming online, because of what we are and how we work. We all know that our brains have a great tendency to like simplification more than complexity. And computer interaction fit this perfectly, because in a way, it is based on the premise of a minimal or very reduced social cues, most of which can be summarized in an emoticon. So it does not require much cognitive effort of investment. A chatbot does not need the emotional involvement or the interpretation of nonverbal cues that are required by humans. For example, when we interact with someone else, we often try to understand from certain cues if they are happy, if they are angry, if they are preoccupied, if they are willing to help us, if you are happy to see us, and so on and so forth, particularly in intimate relationship, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, fiance. The interpretation of nonverbal cues is very important. And the chatbots are going to make our interaction much easier because it goes hand in hand with our brain tendency toward what we might call a bit of laziness. Repeated interaction with chatbots trigger the construction of new mental models that will indeed inform and control those interactions. And it will be experienced as a different state of mind from which we interpret social interaction. So when we interact with another human being, we are driven by the desire to take part in a shared activity. Communication with the bot is different. The happiness that it generates it stems more from a change of mental state, a sort of detachment. We can achieve our goal. For example, I want to get help or information or feeling of companionship does not have any cost. There is no investment needed. There is no need to be nice, to smile, to ask how are you doing, to be involved, to be emotionally considerate. So it is very convenient. Of course, the problem is when we become addicted to this form of bot interaction. And so we slowly develop the preference for what we might call easy communication. And the illusion of companionship is there without the demands of friendship. And this can profoundly impact our falling for it. It becomes so convenient. And because of our tendency to be, let's say, a little bit cognitively lazy, we will go along and prefer it to human interactions. As a matter of fact, if you think for a moment, many parents may use a software program, a chatbot even, to entertain a toddler or an infant while they are having dinner. I have seen it in many restaurants, right? The family is around the table. There is a very new arrival in the family. The adults want to talk about something that interests them. So what do? They give an iPhone or an electronic device to the baby and they start playing with it. And if they grow with that, it will in a way skew their idea of what human communications are because of what I just said, the easy communication, the fact that it is pliable, the fact that it doesn't ask for an investment or for understanding cues and having to pay attention. And this can be indeed very damaging to human interactions. Well, everybody and everything. First of all, of course, the financial sector. That is always the one that is the target of this type of activities because obtaining money through manipulations of accounts, that is not that easy to do, particularly if one is skilled, is very attractive. Another one is obviously security. In other words, penetrating state entities, particularly those that decide sensitive issues, maybe at the Ministry of Defense that controls the Army, the Air Force, or if there are sensitive industries like atomic energy that also can be used for military purposes, or decision-making For example, negotiations between one country and another, or between one country and a company. And there is the strong desire to penetrate this and to find out what is happening, and also to influence it, possibly with false information and with cues that are distracting the people who are making the decisions from the real issues. And therefore, for governments is a major problem today. Then other entities that can be affected are in cyber warfare, the systems that make our life possible every day. We have already seen recently examples of interference with the provision of water to communities, or electricity or gas. In other words, things that impact our daily life. And we all know how vulnerable we are to all of this. While we are very much advanced technologically, we have become, ironically, more dependent on the technology, less self-sufficient like our grandparents or great-grandparents were. We didn't have maybe even electricity, and have to invent and manage situations of survival in an effective way. We are very, very vulnerable to not survive if anything happens. We have seen it here in the United States recently with a very serious winter storm in an area that normally doesn't receive winter storms, in Texas, in the southwest of the United States, where the temperature dropped very, very low. There was a great amount of snow and ice, and therefore enormous demand for energy. And the fact that even the electricity producing plant froze in the use of the material that they utilize to produce energy. And so millions of people were without electricity, millions of people were without water, and many of them literally were prisoners of the situation, and some even died either because of the low temperature, or the lack of medical attention, or of food, and the inability to have any nourishment. So it showed how easy it is if you can manipulate just a couple of things like electricity, water, transportation, communications, even the instructions given to airplanes for their routes, how to get somewhere, can paralyze an entire region, an entire country. And that is extremely appetizing today. We all continue to invest in armies, in air force, in soldiers, and of course it's traditional. But the new future conflicts will be mostly based on cyber warfare, because with cyber warfare, you don't need to have any intervention. You can do it silently, mysteriously, difficult to detect, and paralyzing your opponent in a manner that is absolutely total. And that is what we call conquest. So in a way, I think that is an area where we have to pay a lot of attention. And we see it growing, particularly in potential conflicts between, let's say, China and the United States, or even in your area between Ukraine and Russia, something like that. This type of infiltration that wants to get the levels of command, but not the levels of command of shooting weapons and missiles and destroying, commands of the daily life, so that people cannot move, they cannot warm themselves, they cannot eat, they cannot have water. And that is sufficient to create a situation where be submitted to a higher power and have to negotiate possibly even a way out of this situation. I think that basically we all are in different levels. Obviously, people who are relatively unsophisticated who may not be well-traveled, who may not have higher education, may be more easily convinced of certain affirmations than someone who has been trained to analyze, to think about what he hears or she hears, or who has experienced by traveling with other cultures and understand the nuances of human communications. But in a very sense, I think that what we are seeing here is that these different levels of vulnerability. For that reason, for example, it is easier to spread certain theories for example, conspiracies in the political world, especially among people who are relatively isolated, who depend from limited sources of information, who are susceptible to still believe in certain historical accounts of the history of their country or what happened in the past or who they are relative to new immigrants and so on and so forth. So I think that all of us are vulnerable. As I said, chatbots are really very appealing to all of us. And we will have to be very careful because in a certain sense, for example, that what the chatbot does plays, for instance, on the fact that we like power relationships. In many real life relationships, there is a power equation. Power refers to the capacity of influencing someone else's behavior, of making demands, having those demands met, having what we want become the preoccupation of someone else. When we interact with bots, we are having more power than the other side. At least that is the illusion. We feel that we control the interaction. We can certainly shut down a chatbot and not have any repercussions. If we treat that way our girlfriend or our boyfriend or spouse or friends or colleagues, we are going to have lots of problems. So in a sense, that is also very attractive to people. They can control the interaction and control also the conversation to whatever we want to talk about. And this unconsciously makes us feel better about ourselves and gain a sense of control over our lives. Is extremely subtle, but psychologically important. In other words, you could say that the chatbots and the information that we get through them and our interaction with them is important to boost our self-esteem, because all of us have a desire to have a power-driven relationships. And